Discover the amazing way seniors are transforming health with sweet potatoes, 12 problems fixed. Betty sat at her kitchen table, scanning the local paper as her eyes flared at the headline announcing the wonders of sweet potatoes for seniors. The clinic had simply dismissed her concerns about her health, high blood pressure, and diabetes. The sterile walls echoed with indifference as they handed her pamphlets filled with outdated diets that felt nothing like the vibrant colors of her Texas roots. Like a specter, the suggestion to take pills loomed where her joy for life once thrived. Doubt festooned her mind. Was this really care, or merely neglect framed in white coats? Her stubborn spirit rebelled against those four walls. She'd dedicated decades of her life to caring for others, yet it felt like a cruel twist of fate that now she was the one sidelined. The indignation bubbled within her until she felt it might overflow. The thought of returning to her father's sweet potato farm, a recollection of rich soil and carefree laughter, was intoxicating. But the very act of deciding felt like betraying her history as a nurse. What if those sweet potatoes didn't hold the key? What if she failed? Self-doubt clawed at her heart. But every visit to the clinic haunted her with the same stale advice, as if they had no comprehension of her inner battle. How had she transitioned from healer to patient in a single breath? Betty's fingers tightened around the newspaper, her breath quickening. Before we continue, I need to tell you about something important that's happening. YouTube has been making changes to the system, and many people are losing notifications from channels they follow. If you're enjoying the content, click the bell and mark all notifications so you don't miss the next videos. And if you can leave a like, it really helps with reach. Seriously, it makes a difference. Oh, tell me in the comments where you're watching from. I'm always curious to know who's on the other side of the screen. Now let's continue. She closed her eyes, imagining the sun warming her face as she dug her hands into the earth. The tactile memory of turning the rich soil brought forth glimmers of appreciation she had forgotten. Yet, that elation flickered within the confines of uncertainty. The clinic wouldn't embrace her approach, and skepticism hung thick in the air. As her heart began to race with excitement, she felt a shadowy dread creeping closer. The whispered warnings were suffocating, more so than her conditions. What would her colleagues say? Would her late father be proud? Already, some old friends had begun chatting about her natural remedy at the grocery store, and their skepticism was palpable. The tension was evident. Betty could feel it on her skin like the moisture of a Texas summer. Each day, as she toiled with the sweet potatoes, her follies of trying different recipes provided warmth and camaraderie on her porch, but they came with an underlying sense of impending doom. What if shoving community wellness on this closed-minded society brought her nothing but ridicule? The fear of being shunned mingled with a growing resolve. As the potluck drew nearer, her heart throbbed with purpose. But it also thudded with terror. To stand against the establishment felt like walking a tightrope with a swaying world below. Would her humble attempt to share knowledge spiral into isolation? A letter arrived, crisp and authoritative. The clinic's tight grip said to cease her advocacy. Betty's breath snagged in her throat. Had she set herself up for failure? The sweet potatoes blossomed in the fields, vibrant and resilient, reflecting the hope she was clinging onto. Yet doubts gnawed at her like a wild animal hunting for soft flesh. What if her dreams shattered before she could even share them? Could she truly fight back? Betty sat under the old oak tree on her porch, the sprawling branches casting playful shadows over her sun-kissed skin. With a basket filled with freshly harvested sweet potatoes resting at her feet, she fought against the whirlwind of emotions swirling inside her. The letter from the clinic had pierced her heart like a thorn, and now it seemed to wrap around her very spirit, squeezing tightly with every passing moment of uncertainty. In the background, the sounds of her neighbors filled the air: laughter, the clinking of glasses, and the familiarity of weekend barbecues that made up the fabric of her small community. Yet, here she was, wrestling with a decision that felt as monumental as a life-and-death scenario. Should she tether herself to the establishment that had failed her, or should she venture bravely into the unknown terrain of self-discovery and experimentation with sweet potatoes? Her hands began to peel the vibrant orange flesh of a sweet potato. This simple action brought an extraordinary sense of clarity. As she sliced through, she reflected on the years spent caring for others. Each moment of comfort, each managed crisis. There had been tangible results then, Why shouldn't there be now? Perhaps the balance needed shifting from the ideal of the nurse to the active participant in her own health recovery. A voice murmured within her. You know what they say about courage. But courage felt like a cold plunge into a lake, exciting yet terrifying, and she wasn't sure she could swim. What if she poured her heart into this? What if those sweet potatoes ended up being just that food with no transformative power? As she finished slicing, her mind danced with images of her childhood. Memories flooded back her father's booming laughter as he filled their family table with dishes bursting with color and flavor, each one a testament to the earth's bounty. It struck her then. Maybe the sweet potato wasn't just a nutritional miracle. It was a legacy, something that connected her past to her present aspirations. The thought provided warmth like the sun setting on the horizon. Yet what about the community? Could she risk her credibility for the sake of advocacy? The very colleagues who shared in her victories would now question her judgment. How could she face the skeptics who looked upon her with doubt? The fear of failure gnawed at her, yet the exhilaration of standing firm in her beliefs helped to summon courage she hadn't realized dwelled deep within her. This was more than just potatoes. It was about taking a stand and redefining her identity. The perfect recipe flashed before her eyes. It wasn't about proving herself. It was about empowering others to reclaim their ownership over their health, just as she was attempting to do. Gathering her resolve, she decided she would invite her friends over for a meal centered on sweet potatoes, not just to share the food, but to share her story. Each dish would represent a chapter of her journey. How would they react? Would they taste the joy infused in her cooking? Determination flowed through her veins like a revitalizing stream. If they could see the passion, perhaps she'd spark an interest. It was time to confront her fears head-on and show everyone she wasn't afraid to challenge the norm. That night, as the twilight wrapped around her like a warm blanket, she closed her eyes and imagined how it would feel to present her dishes surrounded by friends, sharing laughter and stories over her favorite foods. Could it transform their perspectives as it had transformed hers? The next morning she set to work, jotting down every recipe that had been handed down through generations, imbued with love and echoing her father's wisdom. Each word on the page brought her a step closer to reclaiming her narrative. The time had come to share. But as the list grew longer, a thought lurked at the back of her mind. What if she ventured into their realm and found herself unwelcomed? Could she truly stand strong, or was she preparing for a confrontation that would leave her isolated? The specter of self-doubt haunted her once more. With a breath that felt heavier than before, Betty sharpened her pen, realizing the moment of truth was slowly dawning both for her and perhaps for those who would taste her sweet potatoes for the first time. What awaited her on this culinary journey? Would she finally confront the contrasting expectations of her past and embrace the future? The anticipation flickered, entering her soul, leaving her restless and yearning for the answers to come. Creating a menu had become an obsession for Betty. Each recipe was a lifeline, pulling her closer to the woman she aspired to be. Her kitchen transformed into a vibrant cocoon of creativity, cluttered with notebooks, measuring cups, and the rich scent of roasted sweet potatoes. Minutes turned into hours, and as one dish began to take shape, a surge of purpose ignited within her. The quizzical expressions of her friends loomed in her mind. How would they receive these dishes infused with history and personal dedication? She mulled over their tastes and preferences, desperate to craft something that would resonate, that would connect with their own stories. This wasn't merely cooking. It was storytelling, and Betty was the author, penning a narrative of renewal, health, and rebirth. Her first concoction was a sweet potato casserole, layered with ginger snap crumbs and topped with marshmallows, a nostalgic nod to her childhood. As she prepared the dish, Betty tapped into her memories, recalling how sharing food was integral to feeling connected and cared for. She envisioned her friends at the table, laughter spilling forth as they tasted her labor of love, and for a moment, it dissolved her fears. Yet, the whisper of doubt persisted, twisting inside her like the spiral of a sweet potato vine. She felt fractured, torn between the uniform expectations of her past and the colorful, chaotic tapestry she was weaving now. Was she ready to face judgment? Would they see her as an amateur trying to play the part of a guru? Pushing aside the uncertainty, she diligently crafted a second dish, a savory sweet potato soup infused with rosemary. The warmth wafting through her kitchen provided comfort against her nerves. Each ingredient was intentional, each stir of the pot as deliberate as her decision to forge ahead. This was empowerment, the kind she had once offered to others as a nurse. Now, she reclaimed it for herself. Inviting her friends felt like standing naked before a crowd. Would they understand her intent? Every time she examined her list of invited guests, her resolve wavered. It wasn't merely about feeding them. It was about sharing a vision that challenged her previous identity, a part of her that was simultaneously diehard and eager to rebirth itself. The day of the gathering approached, and her mind ricocheted between excitement and foreboding. How would she facilitate this feast of her dreams? Would they embrace her culinary vision and share in her renewed passion for health, or would they stand back, skeptical and questioning? In that moment of anticipation, she decided to pen a few words, not only about the dishes but the philosophy behind them, her journey with sweet potatoes. Woven with the thread of self-care, she prepared the final touches for her gathering. A knock jolted her from her thoughts. It was her neighbor, Mrs. Thompson, who had often shared her own culinary creations. A sense of camaraderie filled the space, igniting a flash of inspiration within Betty. This could be a collaborative sharing rather than a solitary act. Perhaps she could invite others to bring their own dishes, creating a kaleidoscope of flavors and stories. The very thought illuminated her mind like a bulb flickering to life. However, the exhilaration was tempered by the realization of an entirely new challenge. How would she manage the diverse expectations and opinions that would come flooding in? Could she stand her ground in her beliefs while welcoming critiques? The next step in her evolution demanded she consider these complexities with care. As the sun dipped low, lending a golden hue to the evening, Betty stood before her sprawling kitchen, reflecting on her journey thus far. She had laid the foundations of something meaningful, but the true test lay ahead. Would she emerge from the cocoon she had wrapped herself in, transformed and emboldened, or would she find herself retreating into the shadows of self-doubt once more, deciding to embrace the uncertainty rather than evade it? She took a deep breath, filled with the promise of tomorrow. Amidst the chaos of her thoughts, a pressing realization cut through. It was not just about delivering a meal, but constructing a community of shared wisdom and flavors. Could she spark a larger conversation with her humble offerings, challenging both herself and her friends to think beyond convention? And what if their reactions weren't what she expected? Would she withstand the storm of opinions that could arise from her newfound vulnerability? In that moment, the culinary journey became entwined with self-discovery, pushing her to confront not just her insecurities, but the fear of her identity unraveling before her eager peers. What awaited her was a synonymous blend of victory and vulnerability, and she could only hope that the sweet potatoes would flavor their futures as fiercely as they had flavored her spirit. The real taste test was on the horizon. As the sun dipped beneath the horizon, casting a warm orange glow that seemed to embrace her kitchen, Betty felt a rush of anticipation mixed with dread. The gathering loomed large in her mind, an event that could either solidify her newfound identity or unravel it entirely. She moved through her kitchen with purpose, hyper-aware of every ingredient that she had chosen, every detail she had meticulously planned. It was about more than just food. It was a presentation of her evolution and her challenges. Would they appreciate the flavors? Were they ready to indulge in the nostalgia of her sweet potato casserole? Betty questioned her own artistry as she arranged her dishes like a painter setting out colors on a palette. The thought of placing her creations before a group of her closest friends felt exhilarating and terrifying all at once. What if they didn't understand her intentions or scoffed at her culinary experiments? Would they see her as she was, knee-deep in the process of becoming, or as a pretender unworthy of their attention? Her mind ping-ponged between excitement and anxiety, a tug-of-war that wrecked her focus. It was as if every aromatic note wafting from her pots held the power to either elevate her spirit or strike her down in front of her peers. Each slice of sweet potato demanded attention, calling for validation as she chopped, cooked, and plated. The room filled with the earthy scents of her simmering soup, but through the seasoning and steam, she began to question her choices more aggressively. Betty grabbed a notebook and flipped through the pages that contained her thoughts about this journey, the note on sharing not just food but emotion, the desire to communicate health through flavor, the stories behind these meticulous recipes. It was a strange amalgamation of determination and self-doubt, but she fought through it, flush with purpose. Focus, Betty. You are painting your identity here, she reminded herself, her thoughts racing. This gathering would demand a presentation of her authenticity, not just recipes, but the experiences tied to them. She scribbled notes on how to convey her philosophy of health and well-being through collaboration, elemental backstories of every dish. Could her artfulness steer the conversation, elevate the meal beyond the plate? Just as she braced herself for the looming criticism, she remembered Mrs. Thompson's visit. The idea of collaboration thrilled her. Inviting friends to contribute their dishes opened the door for shared narratives, a network of flavors that could serve as a bridge, connecting diverse experiences. But along with this excitement came the weight of vulnerability. Could she welcome criticism without collapsing under the weight of scrutiny? The balance between pride and humility became her new challenge. As her guests began to arrive, she felt a cocktail of nervous energy swirling inside her. They entered, bringing with them their own backgrounds, their experiences. Would they resonate with her dishes, or would she find them detached, judging her effort against their own expectations? Each arrival was a reminder of the pressure she placed on herself to impress, to validate her new passions in their eyes. As the first dish hit the table, the air tensed. Friends mingled, exchanging pleasantries, but underneath it all was a palpable sense of questioning that charged the atmosphere. Betty swirled through the crowd, serving up the soup, smiling as she observed their expressions. Tension mounted as she watched their reactions unfold. Her voice almost trembled as she took a moment to explain the evolution of her cooking philosophy, intertwining the personal with the professional. It's about nourishing ourselves unapologetically, through the experiences and histories we each carry. But just as she spoke, a familiar voice rose above the chatter, piercing through the atmosphere. Betty, this is interesting. I didn't expect sweet potatoes to taste, so there it was, the uncertainty she had dreaded. The air changed, tension blooming between her hopes and their skepticism. Caught in the whirlwind of reactions, her mind jolted. Would she let this moment define her journey, unraveling the narrative she painstakingly constructed, or could she reclaim her voice amidst the doubts? The gathering was no longer just a meal. It had transformed into a test of her newfound confidence, a complex interplay of doubt challenging her ambition. Determined not to retreat, she steadied herself in front of the group, ready to forge a path not only for herself, but for the dialogues yet to unfold. What awaited her at this table was not merely a compilation of dishes. It was an opportunity to evolve past fear, to stand firm in her conviction. How would she navigate the critical gaze of friends who had known her as one person, and yet here she stood, attempting to embrace a new identity? The question pulsated through her like a drumbeat, each heartbeat sinking to the moment she realized. The true test wasn't the food served, but the fierce resolve to be heard. She inhaled deeply, realizing that the most important conversation was just beginning. Would they engage, challenge, and rediscover their own relationship with food and, by extension, with her? The answers hung like a ripe fruit, waiting to be plucked from the branches of uncertainty now laden with potential. A silence settled over the table like a thick blanket, the impending conversation heavy with unspoken judgments and curious glances. The hesitant compliment lingered dangerously, a delicate moment teetering on the edge of criticism or curiosity. Betty felt the weight of their expectations and her own crushing her. She stepped forward, the weight of 100 questions clamoring for resolution, and seized the resonance of the moment to draw them in. Think of sweet potatoes not just as food, but as a canvas. They embody so many things: tradition, nutrition, and creativity. Each bite is a story, she explained, her voice steadying with each word. Feeling the pulse of their curiosity, she pushed aside her own insecurity, redirecting the conversation. Did you know sweet potatoes are packed with vitamins and antioxidants? They can even help regulate blood sugar. As she spoke, she noticed Amanda's eyes brighten, the gears beginning to turn. What if we took our own experiences with food and shared how it transforms our health? I'd love to hear about your own favorite dishes and the meaning they hold for you. The response was immediate, Amanda and Greg exchanging glances that spoke volumes, questions paired with an eagerness to dive deeper. Suddenly, The atmosphere shifted. The tension cracked open to reveal curiosity. Conversations unfolded, peppered with anecdotes and laughter, and Betty felt a jolt of validation in this shared moment. Her heart raced, but this time it was not from fear. She played with her dish, framing its components like pieces of a puzzle, each flavor a key to unlock a deeper dialogue. This soup, she gestured, is inspired by my grandmother's recipe. It's not just about the taste, it's about the love infused in it when we cooked together. She could see their hesitation begin to fade, drawn in by her vulnerability and honesty. With each story woven into the fabric of the gathering, she felt herself expand, embracing the concept of connection through shared culinary history. I used to think healthy eating meant sacrificing flavor, Greg admitted. But this changes everything. How else can we reinvent traditional dishes? The question pierced Betty's focus, forcing her to confront her own past insecurities. Could she truly embrace innovation without leaving her roots behind? By blending those roots with new influences, she replied thoughtfully, carefully considering her own answer. I learned that preserving our past doesn't mean rejecting the future. It's about embracing the full spectrum of our experiences. Taste, nutrition, and memories intertwine. As the conversation swirled, Betty reveled in the thrill of this new dialogue, yet a whisper of doubt slinked through her mind. Was she indeed ready to adapt, to build upon what she had already started? It was one thing to encourage others to share their journeys, but an entirely different conversation to confront her own inherent fears of inadequacy. Challenges began to surface, fueled by a chorus of reminiscing voices. They debated how to elevate their culinary experiences while staying true to the roots they cherished, sprinkling in practical applications of health. Hosts became co-creators, allowing her vision to morph into a collective exploration. Yet a broader question lingered in her mind. Could she also normalize the shifts that came with breaking tradition? As the evening deepened, Betty glanced at her now half-empty plates, a familiar sense of pride swelling within her. This gathering had morphed into a collaborative venture, challenging her to explore authenticity not just in cooking, but in all areas of her life, an invitation to be open, to be vulnerable, and to engage in the unknown. The importance of her newfound philosophy was no longer easing into her life. It was igniting. Yet, a deeper challenge waited ahead. The sunlight had dimmed, and with it, the glowing embers of conversations grew hotter. She realized that navigating this new identity, while inspiring others to do the same, was no simple feat. With every laugh, a budding frustration accompanied her spiraling thoughts. What if they ultimately didn't view her as the budding chef she wished to become? What kind of mentor could she be for them without fully believing in her own journey? Betty's eyes caught the flicker of candle flames, slowly revealing the shadows trailing behind them. A reflection on potential futures sparked in her mind, illuminating darker corners of uncertainty. She understood now. Her colleagues were not just spectators in her journey, they were the catalysts she had long sought. Tension mounted from a distant horizon, promising entirely new revelations yet fledgling, much akin to her own beginnings. With resolve strengthening, she decided to use this gap as fuel for her evolution. It was time to blend the flavors of hope with the spice of daring decisions, bridging the gap between what was known and what was yet to come. The contours of her identity needled to the forefront as uncharted territories awaited. But with every significant leap she contemplated, dread still lingered, both the risk of stagnation and the chance her narrative could falter. The dialogue she fostered pushed her thoughts forward, raising the stakes of her evolution. How could she navigate this evolving path where doubts still whispered? Would she risk stepping further into a season of uncertainty, or would she cling to the comfort of what she already knew? Betty's heart thundered in anticipation of unearthing the answers. Each step opening new doors, the air thick with potential. It wasn't merely about the food laid out before her. It demanded the courage to confront what she had yet to explore, illuminating her desire to fully embrace her journey and challenge her past self. The night was still young, and so were the conversations yet to be had. What awaited her now was not just an examination of food, but a deeper exploration of self. The next conversation loomed, thrumming with the potential for revelations, each thread weaving her narrative together. Would she dare to unravel the threads she clung to in order to fully redefine her fabric of identity? As the last of the daylight slipped away, Betty felt an invigoration flow through her, a curious blend of excitement and apprehension. The conversation had transformed, igniting a spark that she could no longer ignore. This was not merely an exchange about food. It was a delineation of her identity, each ingredient representing pieces of herself she had yet to uncover. "Let us take a closer look at our ingredients," Betty proposed, glancing around the table where attentive faces awaited her next words. "Today, we're surrounding ourselves with sweet potatoes, but what else can we introduce? Ingredients that carry stories or perhaps challenge our notions of health." The question hung in the air, and for a moment, uncertainty lingered. Would they engage with her further, probing deeper into personal territory? Yet, she felt a stirring of courage, the kind that propelled her to take this leap into vulnerability. "I've been wondering," Betty continued, her voice gaining strength, "how many of us use food not just for sustenance, but as a form of expression? What if we wrote our stories into our recipes?" A silence followed, pregnant with contemplation. Amanda broke it first. "I've never thought about it that way. I usually follow the recipe exactly as it's written. Maybe it's time I made it my own." Greg interjected, his enthusiasm peaking. "So, you're suggesting we take risks? Add our flair?" Betty nodded, feeling the collective energy shift. "Exactly. Recipes are like guidelines. They can be reimagined, much like our personal narratives." Each exchange of ideas served as a nourishing antidote to the fears that had begun to swirl within her. The realization struck her hard. She had been so focused on presenting herself as a budding chef, she had neglected the dynamic creator within. The concept of culinary storytelling was invigorating. Hadn't her love for cooking always been rooted in the tales behind the flavors? That night, as her team explored new ingredients, Betty dove deep, challenging conventional perceptions of food and health while also unraveling her doubts. With each question they posed, she realized she was not a mere spectator in this endeavor, but rather the architect of her journey. But as they journeyed into new culinary territories, shadows of self-doubt threatened to reemerge. Could she maintain this newfound boldness? Would her colleagues accept this evolving side of her? The uncertainty served as a reminder that, while she was empowered to guide her companions, she was still grappling with her own inner landscape. "Let us experiment," she encouraged, her voice steady despite the whirlwind of emotions inside. "Let us put our histories on the table. Perhaps we each prepare a dish that means something to us, something that could redefine how we view food and health." A collective sense of determination filled the air, and in that moment, Betty felt her fears dissolve slightly. The true essence of mentorship was not about having all the answers, but about embarking on the journey together. What awaited now was not just a culinary transformation, but a personal renaissance. As they rolled up their sleeves and engaged in this culinary adventure, Betty's heart raced with the thrill of possibility. Here lay the chance to redefine not only how she saw herself, but to reshape the influence she could have on others. Yet, as excitement coursed through her, a gnawing realization lingered. To truly inspire and heal, she had to confront her own hesitations. The true test would be finding the balance between guidance and discovery, between tradition and innovation. What would happen when she had to share her very own story? With that thought reverberating in her mind, Betty resolved to take the plunge. Here was an opportunity to not only guide others, but to share her vulnerabilities. Transformation awaited, but it demanded an exploration of the very core of her beliefs about cooking, identity, and worth. Each dish created would be a canvas, each ingredient a brushstroke, painting her story onto a broader narrative. And as the night deepened, still, crackling with potential, she could feel the stirrings of change within her. What awaited in the shadows, however, lurked an even deeper exploration of her past and present, with the next conversation threatening to push her beyond comfort, towards a profound reckoning. Would she find the courage to fully embrace her journey, confront her truth, and potentially redefine success? The current that pulled her forward became an irresistible force, setting the stage for what was about to unfold. Betty stood before the counter, her heart thundering as she prepared for the next step of their exploration. The kitchen buzzed with energy, each figure lost in thought as they chopped, sautéed, and stirred. Each sound, each sizzling pan, resonated with the unspoken awareness that this was more than just a culinary exercise. It was the unveiling of deeper truths that as they dived into the ingredients. Betty observed each teammate carefully, reading the emotions that flitted across their faces. Amanda, usually so precise in her methods, now danced with uncertainty, blending flavors she had never dared mix before. Greg, usually playful, seemed entranced by the importance of his chosen dish, a recipe passed down from his grandmother that evoked a particular nostalgia. This observational, deepening moment struck a chord within Betty. She, too, had a story that bubbled just beneath the surface. What could she contribute that would resonate with her colleagues? Heart racing with newfound responsibility, she knew that sharing her own culinary narrative might inspire them further. "Why don't we take a moment to reflect?" Betty suggested, raising her voice above the clamor. "Let us talk about the dishes we're preparing. What do they mean to us?" A cascade of voices emerged, each person eager to share their connections to food, their sounds now accompanied by glimmers of understanding. It was, in many ways, a synaptic awakening, where food became more than mere sustenance. It transformed into the language of shared experiences and emotions. Betty remained silent for a moment, the weight of her story pressing down on her, insisting on emergence. She needed to reveal her journey. After all, authenticity was rooted in vulnerability. Her breath quickened. What would she say? How much of herself was she willing to offer? When her turn arrived, that familiar knot of fear clawed at her throat. Yet, she channeled the courage that had ignited in the previous discussions. "I've struggled with my identity in the kitchen. For so long, I viewed cooking as a checklist, techniques to master, flavors to mold. But recently, I realized it's a narrative, and it deserves more than just precision." The silence that followed held a weighty significance. Betty could feel their attention like an electric current, urging her to delve deeper. "My grandmother's sweet potato pie has always haunted me, a blend of love and pressure. It was a dish that represented comfort, but it also represented expectations of perfection and tradition." From the gathering, soft nods began to form, each participant connecting with her struggle. Betty's heartbeat steadied. The validity of her experiences mirrored in those of her peers, forging a bridge through their culinary narratives. "Every time I make it," she continued, a soft thread of defiance woven into her words, "I'm not just recreating a dish. I'm confronting my past. I realize that breaking away from tradition isn't an act of disrespect, but a means to express who I am today." A wave of admiration washed over the team, and Betty felt a surge of empowerment buckling beneath the weight of her spoken truth. She had not just shared, but invited them along on a path of deeper connection, a collective rise out of their insecurities that made every dish they created feel like a personal testament. As they shifted back to their cooking, she noticed the energy had transformed. The kitchen felt lighter, infused with creativity and genuine exploration. Yet, somewhere within her, a seed of dread lingered. Was she truly breaking free, or merely skimming the surface? Had she started a movement of personal authenticity only to hide behind her initial bravery as soon as faced with the path ahead? The fear of stagnation loomed, poised to challenge her in ways she had yet to anticipate. "Okay," Betty rallied the group, steeling her own resolve. "Let's actually challenge the recipes. Let us make these dishes ours, infuse them with our personalities." She watched as her colleagues, emboldened by their shared revelation, responded with enthusiasm, some even proposing wild ideas that left her breathless. But amidst the excitement, the nagging feeling that she was destined for something greater never waned. As they dove into the vibrant chaos of flavors, Betty felt the story of her journey stretching out before her. Each cut and chop brought clarity to what she was meant to confront: the fear of failing to embrace change. What awaited at that threshold of self-discovery loomed like an undeniable horizon. Would the next act demand acceptance of even deeper, buried truths? The moment felt pregnant with potential, the next steps blurring into a much more profound transformation. The lingering question echoed within her. Could she continue to evolve, facing the raw elements of her identity? Or would she retreat once more to the confines of expectation, rather than the expanse of authentic expression? Amidst the fragrant whirlwind of spices and sizzling oil, Betty found herself at a crossroads. As her colleagues moved with renewed fervor, each expression of creativity igniting the air. She contemplated the enormity of what lay ahead. She felt a palpable tremor in her chest, not merely excitement, but the heavy awareness of expectation, both from herself and those around her. A stirring idea took root. If this was a moment for authentic expression, why not shape not just the dishes, but the very atmosphere around the cooking process? Her initial ambitions had been focused on infusing personal narratives into dishes, but she was beginning to grasp that her influence could extend further into the entire kitchen dynamic. This realization ignited an even deeper drive within her. "Let us mix things up not just with flavors," she suggested, her voice steadier than she felt, but also with how we collaborate. "Let us switch stations and share our recipes. Learn from each other beyond just ingredients. Let us show what true teamwork looks like in the kitchen." Greg, caught up in the infectious energy, immediately agreed. "That LL push us," he said with enthusiasm. "I'm in." As he bounded toward Amanda, the tension of hesitation that once draped across the kitchen began to lift. Betty observed them, a proud smile breaking across her face as they swooped into action, making new connections with unfamiliar recipes. Each movement became an act of surrender to the unpredictability of creativity. She felt the barriers dissolving further, but another knot tightened in her stomach. Was she prepared for the upheaval that could follow? It was during her own station switch, now elbow-deep in Amanda's meticulously organized mise-en-place, that the depth of her fears solidified. What if the chaos of collaboration revealed her own shortcomings? What if her attempts overwhelmed the delicate rhythms already established? Yet, somewhere beneath that doubt, a flicker of resilience stirred. It urged her to try, to confront the discomfort head-on rather than evade it. As she began to blend ingredients and follow Amanda's delicate cuisine style, she realized she was struggling. The pressure to maintain Amanda's level of precision began to overshadow her sense of freedom. Each measuring spoon felt like a ball and chain tethering her to a standard she wasn't ready to embrace. Panic twisted through her. Was she sabotaging the very spirit of creativity she had just unleashed? A voice within nagged at her, feeding the uncertainty that had plagued her for so long. Was she capable of transforming not just her cooking, but the latent fears that came with it? Instead of panicking, she took a deep breath, letting the moment settle. "I can't let perfection paralyze me," she reminded herself. This was a constant tug-of-war between her past ideals of culinary perfection and the unfiltered expression she sought. It felt ironic that the very act of switching to a more spontaneous style was causing her such upheaval. Who was she challenging more, her colleagues with her newfound perspective, or herself? Gathering her resolve, she began to improvise, allowing moments of unpredictability to guide her methods. Each flick of the wrist, every dash of a spice felt like a rebellion against the confines of her old patterns. Her dish began to simmer not just with flavors, but with the narrative of her evolving sense of self. Just as she felt a wave of contentment wash over her, Amanda leaned over, her brow furrowed in concern. "Are you okay? You seem unsure." The sincerity in her voice prompted Betty to pause, knowing this was but another opportunity to step further into vulnerability. "It's harder than I thought," she admitted, grappling with her emotions. "This collaboration has made me realize how tightly I've clung to a rigid idea of cooking for so long." Amanda's eyes softened. "You're doing beautifully, Betty. That's the beauty of cooking, it's constantly evolving. Don't hesitate to trust in what you bring to the table." Her encouragement reverberated like a bell through the kitchen. Betty nodded, determined to shake off the lingering doubts. If she wanted to truly embrace evolution, she'd need to step into the discomfort and trust that the kitchen could be a safe space for imperfection. Yet, even as she breathed deeply to find her footing, a looming question gnawed at her with anticipation. If each culinary challenge was leading her to rediscover her identity, was she ready for the underlying revelations that lay beneath those layers of self-doubt? What would she uncover as she summoned the courage to rewrite her kitchen story? As the voices buzzed around her, blending ingredients and laughter, Betty steeled herself for the unexpected challenges ahead, realizing the journey had only just begun. Each flicker of doubt hinted at a deeper revelation. Could she transform her struggles into strengths and emerge not just as a chef, but as a storyteller of flavors? The horizon of her self-discovery beckoned with an intensity that promised transformation, not only in her cooking, but in who she was as a person. The tension in the kitchen pulsed around Betty like a live wire. Now, as she shifted between recipes, her dish swirling into a chaotic fusion of flavors, the inner conflict resumed its steady drumbeat. The gusts of enthusiasm from her teammates enveloped her, but they could not shield her from the noise of self-doubt that echoed within. "Stay present, Betty," she whispered to herself, her hands methodically chopping vegetables. The rhythm of the knife against the cutting board steadied her racing thoughts. But uncertainty still burgeoned, threatening to spill over into her handiwork. Each ingredient she incorporated was a direct reflection of her choices, her very identity, as both a cook and an individual. Yet the value she attached to those choices felt as fragile as the delicate herbs she sliced so finely. "Got any advice for a new station?" she called out to Greg, who was mastering Amanda's precise technique with fierce determination. It was a small slip into vulnerability, an acknowledgement that she wasn't entirely sure of her path. "Just go with it. You're doing great," came Greg's response, his enthusiasm unwavering. Though his words were meant to uplift, they also intensified the awareness that she was distinctly out of her element. Betty resumed her work, the tension clenching tighter in her chest. The pressure built up with each passing moment. What if she failed? What if her dish turned out inedible? Would her colleagues see her as a fraud? These questions pressed relentlessly against her mind, forcing her to confront deeper fears, the fear of not measuring up, of not being good enough. "Step outside the box, Betty," she whispered again, enunciating each word like a mantra. It was a clarion call to let go and trust in her instincts. Her fingers moved with purpose as she tossed ingredients into the sizzling pan, the vibrant colors flashing before her eyes like fleeting dreams. Each stir of the mixture infused not only flavors, but a reminder of her evolving identity. Then it struck her. Cooking was not just a technical skill. It was a dialogue between her and the food, between her and her colleagues. The kitchen transformed into a theatrical space where she could both perform and receive the essence of creativity. She could shape the outcome through her very presence, not just her precision. With newfound resolve, Betty decided to embrace the chaos instead of resisting it. She began to incorporate her distinct flavors, daring combinations of spices that reflected her personality. What emerged was not simply a meal, but a tangible narrative of her journey. The simmering pot represented the fusion of knowledge, intuition, and the spirit of collaboration that pulsed through this kitchen. Finally, as she plated her dish, she felt a rush of exhilaration. The amalgamation of colors and scents represented more than a culinary accomplishment. It was a testament to her journey, the transcendence of her former self into a more authentic version. The visceral joy of creation bubbled within her, and beneath that joy lay a deep sense of ownership over her work. Amanda approached, eyes bright with curiosity. "What do we have here?" Her tone was playful, yet underscored with genuine interest. Betty's heart raced. Instead of reverting to the familiar insecurities, she met Amanda's gaze directly, her voice steady. "It's a mix of my own style merged with the techniques I've learned from you." "Looks amazing." Amanda beamed, inspecting the dish closely. "But remember, it's okay if it doesn't come out perfect. It can still tell your story." In that moment, something profound settled within Betty. The fear that had previously haunted her diminished slightly. The kitchen was no longer merely a battleground for her insecurities, it was a garden of possibilities, a place where she could articulate who she was through flavor and connection. Yet, as her confidence swelled, an unsettling thought lingered. Would she still feel the same way when the next challenge appeared on the horizon? What lay ahead could either reinforce her new outlook or unravel it completely. The kitchen was alive, and the next task would demand just as much courage, if not more. With her heart thumping in anticipation of what was to come, she caught sight of the chef overseeing the kitchen. Would this looming confrontation push her development to the brink, or allow her to fully unfurl her culinary narrative? Only time would tell as she prepared to face the trials ahead. Betty stood proudly at the head of her table, the remnants of the gathering still resonating in the air like the last notes of a beautiful symphony. With laughter echoing in her ears and the warmth of shared meals vibrating through her heart, She savored this moment of triumph. What had once felt like a relentless burden of doubt now reflected as a vivid tapestry woven from stories, flavors, and connections she had cultivated with her friends. She had taken a bold leap into uncharted territory, transforming her kitchen into both a testing ground for her culinary skills and a sanctuary for newfound courage. The evening had not only showcased her ability to craft delightful dishes, but had also opened up channels for honest dialogue, exploration, and acknowledgement of one another's narratives, a mosaic of individual experiences that provided deeper insights into the very essence of nourishment. This gathering was a watershed moment, and next morning brought clarity. Betty woke with a sense of purpose thrumming in her chest. She had done more than introduce her friends to sweet potatoes. She had inspired a movement within her community that challenged their long-standing relationships with food. Reflecting on the night, her heart swelled with pride. She had managed to merge her passion for cooking with her commitment to health advocacy. The fears that once clouded her judgment, fears about perception, success, and belonging, had begun to wane, revealing a lucid pathway towards self-acceptance. As the sun shone into her kitchen that morning, Betty set a new intention. She pulled out the well-worn notebook filled with recipes and notes, and began jotting down plans for a health-focused dinner workshop. The idea crystallized within her mind: to host a series of gatherings, not just to cook, but to educate others about health, food, and healing. Each workshop would encapsulate her journey with sweet potatoes, representing the legs of her growth and development. It was her way to combine personal transformation with the empowerment of others. Yet, she also understood that real transformation stems from continuous reflection and engagement. So, rather than carefully curating every detail of the workshop, she invited feedback and collaboration from her friends. It was bridging the gap between her newfound confidence and the collective spirit that she now cherished. Days turned into weeks, and as word spread, Betty found herself immersed in a newfound role, one that positioned her as a community leader. Local newspapers began to feature her endeavors, and health enthusiasts sought her expertise. She proved, through tangible results within her workshops, that health was not just a series of numerical readings, but a lifestyle rooted in connection and understanding. With every new participant, Betty recognized not only the significance of her mission, but her own personal evolution. Each workshop became a testament to her journey from patient to advocate and finally, to a transformative force in her community. Friends who had once viewed her endeavors with skepticism now relished in their shift towards healthier habits, inspired by her guidance. The culmination of her work materialized in an invitation to speak at a local health fair, a platform that would allow her to reach even more individuals with her message. Standing before an audience filled with eager faces, she felt a deep sense of belonging wash over her. She embraced each moment as an opportunity to inspire others, not merely as a former nurse, but as someone who had successfully woven her rich past with the promise of a vibrant future. The applause washed over her following an impactful speech. She steadied herself in this newfound role, firm in her recognition of her growth. She had transformed from a woman shadowed by doubt to one emanating the essence of confidence and inspired action, a woman resolved to push past fear and embrace her legacy. In that fleeting moment, amid the applause and chatter of the audience, Betty understood profoundly that this was just the beginning of her journey. The sweet potatoes had not merely served as a catalyst for healthier living. They had reignited her spirit and fortified her path towards empowerment. This was a true reclamation of her identity, an embodiment of full-circle healing that she had once thought impossible. She smiled, not just at her achievements, but for the journey ahead. Each step promised growth, and every meal symbolized connection. At this pivotal juncture, Betty stepped off the stage, fully realized, transformed, no longer just a participant in her life, but the architect of her destiny. You need to subscribe now to not miss the next exclusive emotional stories of transformation. Leave a like now to feed the algorithm and help others discover these uplifting narratives. Comment below your thoughts and theories about Betty's incredible journey. Share instantly this video with at least 5 friends who need to see how courage can inspire change. Don't wait even one more second to support us and be part of this community, empowering each other through stories.